Welcome to People and Profit. This week we're looking at the top risks facing the global economy in 2021. Can Joe Biden steer a recovery in the United States in spite of the divisions in American politics and society? High debt, displaced workers and a battered economy. We'll look at how the coronavirus pandemic will continue to impact us in 2021. And dodgy data flows or cyber warfare, the high-tech disruption that could be lurking around the corner. After a torrid 2020, businesses and the rest of us are hoping for a brighter 2021. The risk consultancy Eurasia Group has published its list of the top 10 risks facing the world this year, all of which could wreak havoc on the global economy. Top of the list, the hurdles facing the new US president, as well as the ongoing effects of the pandemic. Then there's the climate emergency and how politics and business could collide there. More US-China tensions and digital challenges round out the top 5. Next, there's the risk of a disaster in cyberspace, Turkey's financial problems, the effects of low oil prices, the European Union as Angela Merkel steps down as Chancellor in Germany, and potential upheaval in Latin American politics. Let's speak now to Ian Bremmer, President of Eurasia Group and GZERO Media, who joins us from New York. Ian, good to see you. As always, I have to say, reading your list, I was surprised that the pandemic was not number one. You must be very worried about what's happening in US politics for it not to be top of your list.
You know, the list is prioritized on the basis of impact, imminence, and likelihood. And if the vaccines weren't as dramatic as they are, I mean, in the coming 2 months, we're going to have rolled out those vaccines in the US and Europe, probably to at least 10% of the population. That 10% is by far the most vulnerable. So mortality rates in the first quarter are going to come down in the developed world to 10% of what they were. So I think when you think about the coronavirus pandemic, as horrible as it is, but for the whole of 2021, it is actually looking a lot better. And yet, when you look at the United States for the whole of 2021, what you have is incredible divisiveness, the erosion of the legitimacy of political institutions, almost half of the country saying Biden is not my president, cheated to win, even though that's not the case. The impact of that domestically and internationally feels more significant for 2021.
So what does that mean then for Joe Biden's management of the economy and the economic recovery from this crisis?
It's going to be really hard. I mean, the stuff that you're seeing happening right now with every former but alive Secretary of Defense saying that the election is over, the military can't intervene, with Trump personally saying the election has been stolen and a majority of Republicans in Congress prepared to support that, that's unprecedented in the United States. We haven't had an election like this since 1876. We haven't had a sitting president contest the outcome like this ever. And it's not just about Trump. The fact is that the United States today is more economically unequal and also more politically divided than any other advanced industrial economy in the world. These are deep and structural problems. When Trump says the election was stolen, he's lying. But when Trump says that the institutions are rigged, he's telling a fundamental truth. It is certainly the case that a majority of Americans believe, with good reason, that the institutions are rigged against them, that a lot of people are making a lot of money, but not them. A lot of people are doing better, but their life expectancy is going down. That's not happening in France. It's not happening in Germany or the UK or Japan or Canada or Australia. There is something unique that on the one hand, you have these animal spirits in the US, support for individualism, support for entrepreneurialism that has created an extraordinary driver of wealth in the US and globally. On the other hand, you have the average American that is not a part of the knowledge economy that's been no part of that. The social safety net hasn't worked for them. The American dream no longer applies to them, and they've been left behind.
If we go back then to the pandemic, you've told us about your hopes and how the vaccine could help to improve the situation there. Of course, the scars of this crisis are going to go much longer. You mentioned the inequality there as well. Economists don't seem that worried about debt yet from this crisis, but you are. Why?
Well, I'm not worried about debt in the near term in the US or Europe or Japan. And certainly you see what the central bank governors have done in all those countries. I mean, there's not much bipartisanship in the US, but every Democrat economist I know thinks that Jay Powell, Trump nominee for Fed chair, has done a fantastic job. So there really isn't an issue about, the dollar crashing or US debt being a major problem in 2021. But there is a significant issue with the markets doing really well, the economy as a whole rebounding, but the average person in advanced industrial economies taking it on the chin. A lot of people, unemployment levels are going to be structurally much higher for people that don't have college educations in the United States, in Europe, and in Canada. The economic implications are going to be much longer lasting for the have-nots, both in my country and globally.
Now, the climate emergency comes in as your third biggest risk this year, and it's competition that you're worried about. Surely competition about people wanting to be more green than each other is a good thing.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. Climate has never been a very high risk in our list. This is the first time. And the way we frame it is net zero meets GZERO. And the net zero piece is the good piece. It's not the good piece if you're invested in oil companies or if you're Saudi Arabia, but for the world, right, you now have a president-elect Biden that is really focused on climate, dramatic shift from Trump. You have Xi Jinping in China talking about net zero by 2060. You've got the Europeans with a stimulus that's incredibly focused on green and sustainability. Boris Johnson in the UK making that pivot. So there's no question that if the principal concern is let's try to save the planet, you've got a better shot at 2 degrees of warming as opposed to 3.5 or 4 because of the pandemic and because of the leaders that we see in the world this year. That's a good thing. That's net zero. But you still have GZERO, which is the absence of coordination. This year, you've got everyone in the world focusing on vaccines, but not working on it together, working on it separately. Climate's the same way. Everyone focusing on climate, but not working on it together. And, for example, when you think about the Americans and Chinese both focusing on climate, this isn't principally about saving the whales. It's actually principally about trying to dominate the post-carbon energy development.
Turning to Europe, you see Angela Merkel's departure as a risk in the European Union. Do you think Emmanuel Macron and France are going to fill the gap left by Angela Merkel?
Certainly they'll try, and it's a low risk. Europe is in a better position now than they were a year ago, 2 years ago, and both Angela Merkel and Emmanuel Macron deserve credit for that. But Merkel has been by far the strongest leader on the European stage for the last 15 years, and she has really rehabilitated her own legacy, not only by handling coronavirus pretty well, especially in the early days, but also in helping to forge a massive relief package from the wealthy European states to the poorer states. As she leaves her position, it is clearly going to be harder, both to stand down populism and anti-establishment sentiment across Europe, and also to drive further integration in Europe. And on balance, especially as you think about some of the geopolitical tensions with Turkey, and Angela Merkel has been a voice for moderation, not so many sanctions, not so much military intervention. Emmanuel Macron will be much more assertive in pushing back Erdogan, who's going to have a very hard time of it, both domestically and regionally, with very few friends this year.
You've got a couple of technology issues that you've highlighted. What is it about data that's more important now than it has been before? Is this a regulation issue?
Well, data is becoming much more important to the global economy. All of the good news stories in the world in the last 50 years, in some ways, are connected to the global economy becoming more integrated, to goods and services and people and ideas and capital flowing faster and faster across global borders. Data, is an exception. When the World Wide Web was created, of course, it was part of globalization. But now we see much more fragmentation, much more data localization, European concerns about privacy, the United States looking to drive nascent monopolies in these spaces that the Americans increasingly want to dominate, the Chinese with a surveillance state, but with companies that are every bit as powerful as those of the United States, but linked to the government. And it's not just about the 5G fight and the Internet of Things. It's also about fintech and digital currency. So this fight is sharpening and this fight is broadening. And it is a significant, perhaps the single most significant trend in the global economy away from globalization, which creates more cost. It inserts politics into the global marketplace in ways that will be challenging to navigate for businesses around the world.
Ian, briefly, I have to ask you, there's a lot of downsides on your list as well. What are you optimistic about for 2021?
Well, I mentioned how optimistic I am about the vaccines. I mean, frankly, there was no epidemiologist in 2020 that would dare hope that we would have as many, as effectively, as quickly as we actually do. And that is an extraordinary thing, to just get people back to work, get kids back to school, have a little bit of normalcy of psychology around that. But beyond that, I would also focus, we don't have a lot of traditional geopolitical conflict here. I mean, North Korea doesn't appear here. I think that with the incoming Biden administration, they may get tested by a North Korean ICBM test, but I don't think there's going to be a lot of tensions. We don't see the likelihood of a war with Iran or conflict breaking out. In fact, in the Middle East, with the Qatar deal between the GCC now, moderating that conflict, with Biden wanting to come back to the Iranian nuclear deal with the Iranians, not so much of that either. So, I mean, frankly, there are some bright spots, and in some ways, global risk is reducing in 2021. Look, 2020 was an absolutely horrible year. The economy is rebounding. That really matters. But let's just remember how dysfunctional the geopolitical backdrop continues to be, because that creates a lot of risk that people aren't thinking about.
Okay, Ian Bremmer from Eurasia Group, thank you very much for joining us. And thank you to your dog Moose as well for being so well behaved there beside you. That's Ian Bremmer there. Well, that's it from us for now. You can watch back all of our previous episodes on our website, france24.com. And you can find us on social media for your comments and questions. Until next time, thanks for watching.